Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Hamas claims to accept the truce deal involving 10 hostages and 70-day ceasefire, including partial Gaza withdrawal and Palestinian prisoner release. However, Israel has rejected deal as unacceptable. Aid efforts resume amid blockade and leadership turmoil. Washington says it's working on aid plan, but progress remains elusive. Car plows into Liverpool fans during title parade. Nearly 50 people are injured. 27 are hospitalized, 2 are in critical condition. Police rule out terrorism. PM Starmer commented the scenes as appalling. King Charles has arrived in Canada for a historic 2-day visit. Amid Trump's annexation talk, the monarch is to open Parliament on Tuesday, first royal to do so in 68 years, days after PM Carney rejects US statehood push. The EU faces July 9 deadline to avert Trump's 50% tariffs, while Washington demands tough concessions. The EU seeks a more balanced deal. The EU is also pushing for mutual trade deal. Meanwhile, talks gain new impetus after leaders' call. Trump says Putin has gone absolutely crazy as Russia launches large-scale attacks for 3 nights in a row. Trump says he's considering more sanctions on Russia and proposes Pope Leo host peace talks. However, EU sanctions are an obstacle for Russian officials, while Zelensky calls the airstrikes a political choice by Putin. India and Pakistan escalate drone arms race with large investments following recent conflicts. New Delhi partners with domestic firms while Islamabad collaborates with China and Turkey amid supply chain concerns. North Korea has condemned the US Golden Dome space shield as a nuclear war scenario, following Trump's May 20th announcement of $175 billion missile defense program. Kenya is backing Morocco's autonomy plan for Western Sahara, calling it the only credible solution to the long-running conflict. Both countries agreed to boost trade, open embassies, and expand cooperation in energy, security, and agriculture. A car plowed into a crowd of Liverpool fans during celebrations marking the club's Premier League title, leaving 27 people hospitalized, including 2 who are in serious conditions. Police say the incident, which occurred just minutes after the team's bus had passed through the city center, is not being treated as terrorism. The driver, identified as a 53-year-old white British man from the Liverpool area, has been arrested. Officers described the collision as an isolated incident and confirmed that they are not looking for any other suspects. Let's listen in.
Know that people will understandably be concerned by what has happened tonight. What I can tell you is that we believe this to be an isolated incident, and we are not currently looking for anyone else in relation to it. The incident is not being treated as terrorism. Stopped at the scene, and a 53-year-old white British man from the Liverpool area was arrested. We believe him to be the driver of the vehicle. Extensive inquiries are ongoing to establish the circumstances.
4 children were among those taken to hospital. Emergency crews had to free at least 4 people trapped under the vehicle. Let's listen in.
4 of the injured were children who were enjoying the day with their friends and their families. We can confirm that our teams treated 20 patients at the scene for minor injuries, and these did not need hospital treatment. 27 patients in total were taken to hospital by ambulance. and we believe 2 of those, including one of the children, have sustained.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called the scenes in Liverpool appalling and said his thoughts were with the victims and their families. Liverpool fan club issued a statement expressing solidarity with those affected. The incident came on a spring bank holiday, with hundreds of thousands gathered to celebrate the team's first title parade since the COVID-era trophy win in 2020, when public festivals were all banned. We have Professor Madhav Nalapat joining us as an editorial director of the Sunday Guardian. Thank you for joining us, Professor. What do we know about the driver and his motive so far?
Well, frankly, the police haven't released much information. But I am a bit appalled by Prime Minister Starmer's comment of just being appalled. It's much more than being appalled. It's absolutely horrifying. And if it's not an act of terror, I don't know what is an act of terror. You have a vehicle blowing into a crowd. You're part of that crowd. You have a festival mood, and then suddenly this vehicle comes and running over people left and right. If you're a normal person, you'll feel terrorized. I mean, it is an act of terror. Now, my point is that acts of terror are not committed only by people of one ethnicity. They're committed by people across multiple ethnicities. So you cannot give a free pass to anyone just because he's of a particular ethnicity. And frankly, you immediately come to the conclusion of a lone wolf attack. How would we know? Has he been part of some a group that has been exchanging messages about this kind of thing? Has he been radicalized by some radical political or religious group? We don't know any of this. But you cannot jump to a conclusion within, hours of the incident that it's not an act of terror. In my view, it's very much an act of terror, unless he was under the influence of alcohol or something, and he was not really fully, he was inebriated while driving. If that's so, then clearly, there are other circumstances. But if he were in his senses completely, it's certainly an act of terror. So I would like to say that I do hope, I'm sure the Prime Minister Starmer will investigate thoroughly, and I'm sure if the linkage is found, they'll all be thoroughly investigated. The British police are very efficient, and I'm very certain they'll get to the bottom of this problem.
And Professor, to sum up what you just said, how are authorities describing the nature of this incident, accident, or deliberate?
Well, I simply want to say that I'm sure that whatever the public comments, they are dealing with it in a very serious manner, because frankly, this is reminiscent of attacks that have taken place, similar vehicle attacks, in which the vehicle has been used as a terror machine. You'll remember that box knives were used by the 9/11 terrorists. Box knives, small little things, they were used to very horrible effect by the terrorists. So the reality situation is, I'm sure investigation is going on, and I'm sure it's now branching out. And once they find if there's any linkage, then obviously they are going to investigate that. Otherwise, possibly they're right. This is a lone wolf attack, but frankly, it should be described as an act of terror. Tomorrow, if somebody comes from Gaza or Lebanon and does the same thing in Britain, and you call him a terrorist, and you don't call this gentleman, I'm using niceties because I think we should use niceties on television. If you call this individual, you're not a terrorist, then what would you call them? So the reality is, it is an act of terror, no matter how you label it. And I'm very sure the British police and the London Metro Police and the other police departments will be collaborating to ensure that this is solved, because you cannot have a gang on the loose. Prime Minister Starmer will not have a gang on the loose. And what is very worrisome is that it's happened, it's happened in such a terrible way. And it's when people were in such a happy mood. And this is exactly the definition of an act of terror in my textbook. Thank you.
This leads me to ask about the fact that this was after COVID, this was the big main event after so long. Professor, what security measures were in place during this celebration?
Look, clearly they were not sufficient. Clearly they failed to detect this individual speeding towards the crowd. And I mean, clearly there was a failure of intelligence, and there was a failure of reaction by the police. Very large crowds especially in Western cities, need to be safeguarded. I mean, otherwise what happens is life will come to a frozen halt. And that, of course, the intention of these terrorists, that life in Western societies comes to a halt. I mean, social life and other kinds of life. That's why you go to bars, restaurants, roads, festivals, that kind of situation. So I'd like to say that I'm sure that they are investigating all that thoroughly. And I'm sure if there is more to be seen, we will hear about it. I'm quite sure Prime Minister Starmer will not keep that under the carpet. Thank you.
And what's the latest on the victims' conditions? Do we know anything else so far about the victims?
Look, the number is just 2 of people who are seriously injured. That's really a great blessing, and that's all we know, because quite frankly, you have a lot of information on social media, different people giving different views, but I'm not going to dignify that by quoting them. But the reality is that we have to go by the official report, and the official report says there are 2. But in my view, something like this happening, I'm surprised that there's only 2. There are only 2 people who are seriously injured. I would have expected much more, but I'm very certain that by the look of it, I would have expected much more. And with just 2 individuals, including tragically a very young individual, well, it's very tragic. But it's amazing that more people were not seriously hurt.
And building on that point, has Liverpool fan club or local official issued any statements about this?
Look, we have got the bare facts of the situation, and that's about it. That's all I have been able to access. But I'm sure they're working hard on it. I mean, they are well prepared to face acts of terrorism, no matter who perpetuates them. And I'm very sure they're working hard on solving this problem. And if the person is a lone wolf, well, then so be it. I mean, thank heavens. But if there are others involved, I'm very certain Prime Minister Starmer will be very upright about it. And so will the Liverpool police. They'll be very upfront about it. But they would like to retain their credibility with the British public, not just Liverpool, the entire world, especially in Britain, will be watching this in horror, in shock and horror. So they would want to ensure their credibility continues. So there will be I think the facts will come out. It's only a question of when the facts come out. Thank you.
Last but not least, Professor, what's next in this police investigation?
What next is that they'll be checking the records of the internet records, and they'll be checking his social register, and they'll be going through that with a fine-tooth comb, and then they'll be checking on those he is contacting frequently, especially those he contacted just before he did this attack, and they will be investigating that very quietly but very thoroughly, I'm very sure.
Thank you very much, Professor Madhav Nalapat, for joining us. You will stay with us, and we move on to our next story. Washington has dismissed claims by Hamas that it agreed to a new ceasefire deal in Gaza. The group said it accepted a proposal from the U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff involving a 70-day truce and the release of 10 Israeli hostages. But Witkoff called Hamas' response disappointing and completely unacceptable, adding that the group had not agreed to his actual terms. Israel too rejected the plan, stating no responsible government could agree to the conditions. Amid stalled negotiations, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reaffirmed his commitment to recover all hostages from Gaza, both living and dead, we are not going to give up. Let's listen in to the Israeli Prime Minister.
יש קשיים. החמאס עיקש, הוא סרבן, כך אמר גם הנציג האמריקני הערב, ויטקוף, זה נכון. אנחנו לא מרפים מהמשימה. אנחנו החזרנו עד היום 148 חטופים חיים. ויש עוד 20 בוודאות שהם חיים. ויש גם אחרים שאינם בחיים. ואנחנו מתכוונים להחזיר את כולם. אז, כך היום, נכריע את מבקשי נפשנו, נשיב את כל חטופינו, נוודא שעזה לא תהווה איום על ישראל.
Tensions continued to rise in Jerusalem as far-right Israelis chanted "Death to Arabs" and clashed with Palestinians during the annual Jerusalem Day parade. Opposition leader Yair Lapid condemned the event as a festival of hatred and racism. We have Professor Madhav Nalapa joining us to give an insight as editorial director of the Sunday Guardian. Thank you, Professor, for staying with us. How do you see the current state of ceasefire talks between Hamas and Israel?
Look, I've said immediately after the attack that Netanyahu is going to go after Hamas and destroy the military wing, and he will not stop until he has destroyed the military wing. Hamas is desperate for a pause so that it can catch its breath. Frankly, Netanyahu has got it on its ropes, and Netanyahu is not the kind of person who will let go once he's got an opponent on the ropes. So I think he's already been talking about a huge offensive, a very, very huge offensive. Obviously, that is targeted the military wing of Hamas. So I would again request Hamas, if you've got any consideration for the people of Gaza, well, I would advise you to give all the hostages back, and on condition that you get safe passage out of Gaza and you completely demilitarize and leave Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. I think that will be the only solution for this horrible organization. And if they take it, it's good. But I don't hope very much that they will do so. It's a great tragedy that we're seeing it in Gaza. The innocent people are suffering, and this is what happens when a terror group rules over you. Someday, sooner or later, this kind of ruin will come because they will go too far. And the October 7 attack on Israel was a step way too far. And after that, Netanyahu realized that they were in an existential conflict, and it's either Israel or the military wing of Hamas. So obviously, he would like the military wing of Hamas to be finished. And I think President Trump, Biden, I'm not very sure what he would do. President Trump will quietly ensure that Netanyahu is given the means to finish the job. And I think he does mean to finish the job. If you check my writing, I made it clear from the very beginning that Netanyahu will not stop until he's eliminated the military wing of Hamas, no matter what. And it's very telling that he's talking about hostages living or dead. Living or dead. So it's very clear that he is going to go all out and all the way until the military wing is completely broken into pieces and cannot be reassembled.
Since you've just mentioned Trump, what role do you think the United States is trying to play in this conflict?
Look, if the US would be quite happy if this kind of a solution came forward, but I'm from the beginning not very hopeful of this kind of a deal. The reality is that the two are living in separate universes. Hamas is living in one universe, and the Israeli government, is in another universe. Hamas would like to preserve its military wing and thereby preserve its control over the people of Gaza. It's controlling Gaza not by popular appeal. It's controlling it by sheer force of the military wing and the terror it inflicts on those who are against Hamas. So, very frankly, in this battle, I think Trump will help Israel to destroy the military wing. But I think President Trump also realizes that terror anyway is a threat everywhere.
Thank you so much, Professor Madav Nalabat, for joining us. And as we move on to our next story, Lebanon has announced a historic move to disarm Palestinian militias operating inside its territory, a step aimed at bringing all weapons under state control. This initiative comes after regional Iran-backed groups, including Hezbollah and Hamas, saw their influence erode following the recent escalations with Israel. The Lebanese-Palestinian Dialogue Committee, along with Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, set a timetable for the disarmament. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Lebanese President Joseph Aoun backed the plan, agreeing that armed factions would no longer use Lebanon to target Israel. Starting mid-June, 3 camps in Beirut will begin handing over weapons. Camps in other regions have already been cleared. Aoun also accused Israel of violating a ceasefire deal by retaining southern territory and Lebanese detainees. The U.S. has voiced support for Lebanon's army, vowing to continue military assistance. We stay in the Middle East. Meanwhile, Israel's military has announced that it had intercepted a missile launched from Yemen towards Israel, with sirens sounding in several areas. The Iran-aligned Houthi rebels in Yemen have continued to fire missiles at Israel, claiming it is in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. In a post on social media platform X, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has called for effective joint efforts by Iran and Pakistan to stop Israel. Iran's Supreme Leader has urged for Muslim unity and called for coordinated action between Iran and Pakistan in the face of what he described as the Zionist regime's crimes in Gaza. In a separate post on X, he remarked that the situation in Gaza had deteriorated to such an extent that people in Europe and the United States were protesting against their own governments. He added that despite these dire conditions, certain Muslim governments continue to align themselves with Israel. Khamenei has also hailed the relations between Iran and Pakistan as warm and brotherly. Moreover, he called Palestine the most important issue in the Islamic world. And he said that Pakistan has never been influenced by the inducements from global powers on its stance. North Korea has blasted U.S. President Donald Trump's Golden Dome missile defense plan, calling it a dangerous push towards nuclear confrontation in space. He described the system as a tool for unipolar domination, warning it would fuel a new arms race and space militarization. The sharp criticism comes as Trump vowed to make the Golden Dome operational by the end of his term, promising it could defend the U.S. against ballistic missiles, hypersonics, and advanced cruise missiles. However, much of the system's space-based technology remains unproven. The statement coincides with a high-level security visit. A Russian government delegation led by Deputy Interior Minister Vitaly Shuklika has arrived in Pyongyang, as North Korea's Security Minister Ri Chang-dae heads to Moscow for a major security summit. ASEAN has unveiled its 20-year blueprint for the future, the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on ASEAN 2045, following its adoption at the 46th ASEAN Summit. The document outlines the region's strategic roadmap through 2045, with a focus on sustainable and inclusive developments. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim called for a people-centered vision that closes development gaps and invests in human potential. The plan adopts the ASEAN Community Vision 2045, built on 4 key pillars: political, security, economic, socio-cultural, and connectivity. ASEAN Secretary General Kao Kim Huron said the document offers guidance amid global uncertainties, including climate change, digitalization, and geopolitical shifts. He added that the roadmap reinforces ASEAN's commitment to unity, solidarity, and global partnerships. Let's listen to other statements made by the Malaysian Prime Minister during the second day of this summit.
Today we renew that solemn promise, not as a tribute to the past, but as a living covenant with the future. It is often said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. That is why ASEAN has sought to do, through decades of steady effort, shared stewardship, and strategic vision. We seek must rest on foundations of sustainability and inclusion. ASEAN's integration must be genuinely people-centered. That means closing development gaps, raising the standards of living, and investing in the human spirit and potential of all our.
A massive fire has forced a shutdown at Ecuador's largest oil refinery in Esmeraldas province. The blaze, which erupted in a fuel storage tank on Monday, sent thick fumes of smoke into the air and prompted evacuations of workers and nearby residents. Petroecuador, the state oil company, confirmed that operations at the 110,000 barrel per day plant have been halted to ensure the safety of staffs and infrastructure. 5 people were treated for smoke inhalation, but no serious injuries were reported. Energy Minister Inez Manzano announced the fire was under control, but residents say they remain anxious. One worker described hearing a loud noise before running for safety. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.